This week on The Record, a look back at a year full of political shakeups, from a shrinking Board of Aldermen to the sudden resignation of St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, to legal challenges to Illinois' ban on assault weapons and Missouri's ban on transgender care. We count down the top 10 stories of 2023 right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. 2023 was supposed to be the off year in a political world without any major elections to speak of, but Illinois, Missouri, and St. Louis politicians didn't quite get the memo. Instead, it was an action-packed year full of historic transition and consequential laws taking effect that will impact voters in both states for years to come. Joining me now, as we look back on the 10 stories that topped the record in 2023, political analyst Anita Mannion is joining us, former Illinois Congressman John Shimkus, and former Missouri Congressman and Democratic Party Chair Russ Carnahan. Good to have you all with us. I would just note the two of you each in the party out of power in your state. So while those in power were setting the agenda, passing a lot of the Big Ten things, maybe you'll provide that other context as we go through. All right, let's start off here. Coming in at number 10 on our list, Missouri Governor Mike Parson appointing his government lawyer Andrew Bailey as Attorney General. Bailey swore the oath of office nearly a year ago on January 2nd, replacing Senator Eric Schmitt as Attorney General in Missouri. All right, so Congressman Carnahan, I understand that the Attorney General represents a different party than you do, but right now, how would you grade his effectiveness either at protecting consumers and people in Missouri or at advancing the interests of his party from his perch?
Well, the governor's had more appointments, I think, than any governor in history, and he's appointed someone who's never run for a statewide office. And so I think what you've seen is somebody really reaching to score some political points with his office, and that seems to be what's driving him, and doing some things that are pretty out of the mainstream, and really using the office in a way that's making it highly political. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this appointed, relatively unknown Attorney General, and the challenge that he's going to have in a Republican primary. So that's the dynamic that's set up right now.
The power of the incumbency usually helps the incumbent in an election year, perhaps in a primary, but judges have sort of slapped Mr. Bailey a couple of times, saying he's overreached, tried to stretch his power into places where it doesn't constitutionally belong. Has he helped or hurt himself with that incumbency card?
You know, I think he's following in the footsteps of his predecessor, Eric Schmitt, who also, tried to sue about China and COVID and got some of those slaps on the wrist as well. But it does raise his profile. He's in the news. And when you're talking about Republican primary voters in Missouri, it probably doesn't hurt him.
All right, let's move on to our ninth story of 2023. It's the shrinking of the Board of Aldermen. St. Louis voters opted to collapse 28 wards down to 14 in 2023, leading to an interesting spring election season, what many called Aldergeddon. Anita, the composition of this board and its president are noticeably more progressive in their public policy proclamations, but have they made any of those strides in that direction to actually enact more progressive policy? Have you seen that yet in this first year?
Yeah, they have worked on some policy. The budget is a policy document, and that went through pretty easily. They've set up a new department to work with immigrants in St. Louis and help introduce people. They're using some of the ARPA funds and talking about how to use the RAMS funds in different ways, including $500 payments to residents. And so I think they've gotten things done, but they're getting them done also more easily without a lot of struggles that they've had in the past.
And Congressman Shimkus, we're only about a year into this experiment. I know you may not track St. Louis local politics much, but you also come from a shrinking state, like a shrinking city here, and you've had some experience not only with the congressional map being reduced, but years ago it was Illinois voters who passed that cutback amendment to fire a third of the House in Springfield. All these years later, with the benefit of hindsight, what ultimate effect did that shrinking of the legislative body have in Illinois?
Yeah, it's very interesting because it was unique. The Constitutional Convention was driven because in that process you would have a minority party represented in a district. So it was
Democrats downstate, Republicans in Chicago.
That's right. And so I think, especially with the polarized world we have today, it might be good to be able to have a voice of the other party inside some of these areas that they're persona non gratas right now, right? You can't find a Democrat in rural Illinois, and you really can't find a Republican, and definitely in the inner city and sometimes in the suburbs.
But if I got cornered into a conversation at a dinner party and colleagues or friends of mine asked me, what's the one thing you could do to reform Illinois politics? If I told them more politicians, they'd laugh me out of the room, wouldn't they?
They would laugh. I mean, I would segue to gerrymandering and mapping reform.
Some of the polarizing effects there. All right, let's move on. We got another big story. We're moving at a fast clip here, but in 2023, the police unions pushed to try to take control of St. Louis Police Department away from the city and give it to the state of Missouri. That measure failed in May, largely because of the defense we saw from Mayor Tashara Jones and some other action in Jefferson City. Congressman Carnahan, a few Republicans really ratcheted up the pressure campaign to try and enact this topic this year, but it still failed. What does that tell you about the politics of local policing at the state level?
Well, it gets to really the principle of local control, which Republicans used to stand for, but now if they don't like where you are locally, then they want to take control away. When I was in the legislature, the state did control the police boards here, and the fight was to get back to local control. I think that's where it belongs.
Very interesting. Let's move along quickly to another big campaign announcement. He's the top prosecutor in the largest county in Missouri, and he was running for U.S. Senate. But now Wesley Bell is challenging Congresswoman Cori Bush for her spot in Congress. It's our 7th top story of 2023. Wesley Bell launching his congressional primary bid instead. Congressman Shimkus, you're from Illinois again, but look, you've certainly seen the effects of primary challengers trying to take on incumbents. You've got Darren Bailey across the river challenging Congressman Mike Boss for a portion of the state you used to represent there. Should state parties, you think, get involved in primaries like this to protect incumbents?
I think anyone who, constitutionally, it's very simple. You're 25, be a U.S. citizen, live in the state. I encourage everyone to get involved.
Free for all.
That's right.
Anita, how serious should Congresswoman Cori Bush take this challenge from Wesley Bell? What kind of a challenger do you think he represents for her?
Well, he's shown that he can win an upset race in St. Louis County. He's done it before, as has she. So I think this will be a very interesting race. Certainly the issues with Israel and Palestine were a motivating factor in this race, so that'll play out in the county as well.
And Congressman Carnahan, we understand the Missouri Democratic Party will be sort of sitting this one out, letting them duke it out for themselves?
Yeah, the party doesn't get involved in primaries, but, there's nothing wrong with having a spirited primary. That, again, if that gives people choices, as John said, and, that's better for democracy.
All right, a lot more with our panel and the top stories of 2023 when we come back. Welcome back as we count down the top 10 political stories of 2023. Coming in at number 6 is the Illinois assault weapons ban. In January, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Protect Illinois Communities Act into law. Almost immediately, gun rights groups filed legal challenges to that law, and so far the Illinois Supreme Court has upheld it. The U.S. Supreme Court has declined to review it at this stage. One of our recent guests was at the Highland Park July 4th mass shooting that inspired that law change. She pointed to national Fox News polling showing broad support, 61% of people across the country who would support banning assault weapons. Congressman Shimkus, where do you think that level of support would be in Southern Illinois?
Not nearly that amount. I think the biggest challenge will be citizens not registering. They're just not going to abide by the law.
And we've seen Darren Bailey, the former candidate for governor, running for Congress. He said, basically, come take it.
Yeah, that's Southern Illinois.
Is that a responsible thing for a person to say running for federal office?
Well, I believe you got to comply with the law. Charlie Brennan used to say, I'm not going to tell you if I own a gun or I don't own a gun, right? But if I had an assault weapon, I'd register it.
With the state. Very interesting, and that process ongoing even now. Let's move to number 5 on our list, the Missouri abortion ballot initiatives. Right now, multiple groups at various stages in this petition drive to try and put an abortion question on the Missouri ballot next fall. Congressman Carnahan, what is taking Democrats so long to really figure out which of these questions to get behind?
Really to do it right. Learning from other states, we've seen measures in Kansas, Wisconsin, Ohio recently. There's been really broad bipartisan support to get these measures back to protecting, women's rights. And I think there are a number of ways to do it, but I think they're looking at other states. They're probably looking at polling. and looking at funding, but I'm very optimistic. I think this is going to get on our ballot.
Can you see a scenario in which the Democratic Party of Missouri backs this 12-week abortion plan, one that Planned Parenthood has called very restrictive?
I don't see that happening. And again, I think there's way better alternatives than that.
Very interesting. Anita, we've talked about this at some length on this program. You've highlighted how every state so far across the country that's voted on this question has voted to expand abortion access. What is the scenario here where anti-abortion activists might defeat a measure like this in Missouri? Can you see that path?
Yeah, well, part of the problem is we've had all these delays by Republicans who are in office right now, so it's shortened the timeline. Even though you need about 170,000 signatures, you really need almost 300,000 because you're going to have invalid signatures and such. And fundraising, they need to coalesce. What we've seen in other states is multiple people coalescing around one initiative, and we haven't seen that here in Missouri.
All right, our panel has a lot of experience from Capitol Hill. We're going to lean on that when we come back, looking at some of this ongoing efforts to compensate victims of radioactive waste in North County. What got caught up on Capitol Hill? That's next. Welcome back to The Record. In the number 4 spot of our countdown of the top 10 political stories of 2023 is the push to win compensation for victims of radioactive contamination in the greater St. Louis area. After thousands of documents released this year showed the federal government knew all along about the dangers of radioactive waste buried throughout the area, local advocates teamed up with Senator Josh Hawley trying to expand RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. That fight is still ongoing, but the effort to try and add it to the National Defense Authorization Act failed just before the end of this year, leaving many hopeful residents in our area without compensation. Congressman Shimkus, for our viewers who may not have the time to follow along with all the painstaking minutia and maneuvers on Capitol Hill, can you give us a sense of what might have happened in a closed-door conference committee when this big bill reaches this area? Is it really just all happening behind closed doors like this, where this wheeling and dealing is going on?
Schoolhouse Rock, how does a bill become a law? I mean, both chambers, and then if they're not the same, they got to go to conference. In my 24 years, I was on a couple conferences. There was only one that was public and open, and that was the 2005 energy bill. And we had votes, we had amendments, it was great.
And how is that process different than what we've come to know?
There's no rules for a conference, so usually it's conducted by major staff, and then big issues, the members may get involved and say, this is really important to me, I'm playing my card here, and I'm not going to vote for this if this provision isn't in there. But it's mostly worked out between the senior staff members.
I wonder why they didn't provide a template for future negotiations. Could that be, did it have a better work product at the end of it? Or is there some of this that has to go on in private?
24 years, I've only seen one public conference committee that I was involved in. So there's no rules for it. There's no guidelines. And remember, the House and the Senate, we create our own rules. How even in the whole process, how a bill becomes a law, it's the House and the Senate rules that determine how they're going to bring bills forward.
The lack of transparency just incredibly frustrating for many people trying to follow it. Anita, I lost count of how many times Senator Josh Hawley's press office pounded out headlines pertaining to this issue. Historically, St. Louis, large urban metro areas haven't backed Republicans, haven't backed Hawley. How does his engagement on this issue around the clock impact his reelection campaign?
Yeah, he has a serious challenger in Lucas Kunce and previously potentially Wesley Bell. It's interesting. We don't often see Cori Bush and Josh Hawley on the same side of an issue, but we do here. And clearly he is. Hawley's been running as more of a populist conservative, and this kind of strikes a balance with that messaging.
Very interesting. Coming in at number 3, the monumental move away from cash bail in Illinois, the land of Lincoln, becoming the first state of the nation to end money bond, a big change in the criminal justice system. Congressman Shimkus, Illinois Republicans had campaigned hard in 2022 against this move, warning that they used colorful language to warn that this would be a massive jailbreak. It didn't really work to persuade voters at the ballot box, but from what you've seen so far in Southern Illinois, from the people you've talked to, prosecutors and the like, how accurate can you say those initial claims, those warnings were after all?
Well, I just spoke with Jeff Connor on the way over here. He's the sheriff of Madison County. He said, okay, give me a lowdown. I'm going to get this question. And he says it's really too early. It really only went into effect in September. The folks get 3 chances to appear. The question will be if they don't appear after the 3rd chance. So even though the jail population in Madison County is down by 25%, this time next year it could be overflowing again. So add this to your questions next year.
Okay, we will do just that. The top 2 stories of 2023 when we come back. Welcome back as we look back on our top 2 stories of 2023. Number 2, the new Missouri state law that bans transgender care for most minors. It went into effect in August, prohibiting healthcare providers from performing gender-affirming surgery on minors. It also blocks doctors from prescribing hormone therapy to any minors not already being treated. Congressman Carnahan, can Democrats win on this issue?
I think it's part of a bigger issue, frankly. If you are a parent and you want the best for your children, you want the best health care, you want the best doctors and the best technology, but the legislature's trying, the Republican legislature is trying to substitute their judgment for that. And they're trying to do the same thing with, women who want choice, or what books you read, or what you can teach in schools. And so this the whole theme from the Republican legislature to go after these rights that people care a lot about. And this is really part of that overall agenda.
You're framing it as an issue of liberty.
Yes, absolutely.
And choice. I want to move on to the top issue of 2023. That's the changes we've seen, the radical changes inside the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office. After months of legal challenges and controversy in her office, Kim Gardner announced she would, in fact, resign after Circuit Attorney, just weeks after saying she would not. Shortly after, Governor Parson appointing Gabe Gore to replace her, and he was sworn in there. Again, we'll go to Congressman Carnahan on this one. Just how big of an issue was that? Some Democrats told us it took all the oxygen out of the room in Jefferson City for most of the year when her downfall was still imminent.
Yeah, first of all, my wife was her first job out of law school. She was an assistant circuit attorney in the city. So that office used to be famous for getting talented people to get trial experience, and even developed a lot of great career prosecutors. And that to get past the controversy that was in the office, to get Gabe Gore in there, and he recently announced that he's going to run for a full term as a candidate. It's been really a breath of fresh air. He's brought a lot of professionalism back to that office, and really addressing the really crime needs and turning that office around. It's been a big deal for the city.
He's a Democrat, appointed by a Republican, but a Democrat in a Democratic majority city. Has he done enough, do you think, to shore up any reputational damage the party might have suffered under the era of Kim Gardner?
We'll see. I think that's a work in progress. He's done some, I think, remarkable things in just the short time that he's been there to turn that around, to get a lot of confidence back from, not just, the community, but civic leaders. It's been a really significant change for the city.
In the little time we have left, I want to try to get a look ahead to 2024. We've done a lot of counting down and looking back at this last year, but Congressman Shimkus, we just saw in Colorado, the state Supreme Court there boot President Trump from their primary ballot, and the Supreme Court may still rule on that decision. Does that? How do you evaluate a question like that? Is it one of political grievance, or just a plain read of the 14th Amendment?
Yeah, you're going to have legal scholars talk on both sides. You can read countless decisions, whether it's was there a conviction for an insurrection? Is he an
that
officer?
Your standard? There must be a criminal conviction for it to...
Well, I think that's the whole debate about even throwing out Santos, right? You throw him out before he's actually convicted of committing a crime.
Because the Constitution also entitles you to due process.
Correct. So, but this is smart people on both sides. All it does is fire up the Trump base for another grievance. Colorado's not a winnable state for him. And I don't know if it harms him. I really don't think it harms him.
Congressman Carnahan, do Democrats want to see Donald Trump on the ballot in 24 in the general election?
I think Democrats don't want to see him in the White House again. I think we're looking at a rematch. Joe Biden, I think, will go down in history as one of the most consequential presidents in our country's history. And the reason he's standing up like he is he wants the country on the right track, respect democracy and the rule of law, and getting things done. And that's what he's running on. And Trump's kind of the antithesis of that.
Sure. Do you think, though, you've seen the polling, you've seen his poll numbers slipping. Do you think Joe Biden today inspires confidence in the independent voter?
I think he will. And again, elections are about choices. And I think when you look at the record of how gotten through a really tough economy and built that back, and historic investments in this economy to turn it around, those are you can't argue that those are historic. Those are historic achievements. I think he's going to run on that. So it's going to be, to me, it's going to be a really critical election, a critical choice for the country.
We saved the best for last. Anita Mannion, what are you looking forward to in 2024?
Oh gosh, all the races. The Missouri Republican gubernatorial primary alone will be interesting, and certainly the Bush-Bell race.
All right, we'll see you next year. We're off the record. I got the cue to done.